How's it going, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And joining me today is Julio Anta. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing okay, man. I'm doing okay. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and talk to us about
Of
your
course.
upcoming projects and your history with comics and where it all began. And these recent works that you have coming out. Actually, one today and then maybe tomorrow at local comic book stores. But before we go into details about that, tell me a little bit about yourself, man. Who are you and what do you do and what are we talking about?
Yeah. So I am a comic book writer. My first book was with Image. It was a book called Home, and it was released in single issues and obviously as a trade. And then since then, I've mostly focused on graphic novels, so working with a lot of book publishers. Last year, I had two books that came out, one called Frontera, which was published by HarperCollins, and another one called Si Se Puede, which was published by Penguin Random House. And then today I've got a Blue Beetle graphic novel with DC called This Land Is Our Land, a Blue Beetle story.
Okay. And will this one here, I haven't had a chance to read it, but will this one here be bilingual? Because I know sometimes, I know you probably know this. There was a really cool thing that DC did when Keith Giffen was still in the book, and one of the issues was written in Spanish, and then they had the translations in the back. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, and then they did it again with Graduation Day, the most recent single issue series. I think the first arc was they released it all in Spanish also.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. But with that said, that is not the case with my book. Unfortunately, I know. We're talking about how great that is, but I know. Hopefully soon.
Okay.
You know, this is a graphic novel, so it's like a 180-page full story in it. And I think it's really conducive to being in Spanish. And they're doing interesting things with it also. There's an educator guide for teachers that's coming out because the book does tackle a lot of issues about immigration and social responsibility. And this is the first time they've ever done a study guide for teachers that they can use it to use this book in the classroom. So I'm crossing my fingers that we get the Spanish edition too.
Dude, that is really cool. Okay, so have you received your physical copy of the book already?
I have. I got it right here.
Now, you've written at Image Comics, and I love Image Comics. I know you do. We're both part of I think you're still in there, and I think I'm still in there, but both part of a Facebook group that is all about collected editions.
Yeah.
So how cool is it that now you're like, hey, I wrote this for Image, but not only that, brother, now you're like, I wrote something for DC Comics.
Yeah.
And it's a graphic novel, and I can share it with everybody. That's so freaking. How did that feel to get the books ahead of time?
It's wild, man. I mean, I had done some single issue work, but like short stories for DC, you know, when they do like a spring anthology or, you know, stuff like that. So that was really cool. But, you know, those are like 10-page stories. But with this book, with the Blue Beetle book, which is like a full collect work. And, you know, you mentioned I'm a fan of your channel. Like, I know your channel through the Facebook group. I collect collected editions and omnibus. So to have like a real book from DC with my name on it is really surreal. It's really cool, especially since, you know, one of my early memories is my dad buying a bunch of Death of Superman comics to flip.
Not even read.
and especially to flip because we had like 20 copies under the bed for my whole childhood because that's what everybody else did, right? Like the speculator boom.
We were gonna be rich, brother.
Yeah, didn't happen. We didn't move out of the trailer park. I'll tell you that.
Spoilers, it did not happen. Wow. Okay, so it's like kind of bringing it back home, and you're writing the character of Jaime.
Yeah.
In this, okay. So what made you decide, or maybe it was a decision by editorial or DC themselves, to make this particular book a graphic novel instead of a single issue? What is it that made you move to that route?
Yeah, I mean, for this book in particular, it was because I was part of this thing called the Milestone Initiative at DC, which was kind of like a training program for new talent that replaced, you know, this one was for like underrepresented creators, but in the past they had like the New Talent Showcase. at DC. So this was the latest version of it in 2022, I think it was. And my editor during that time was her name is Courtney Jordan, and she works in the graphic novel department at DC. So, like the original graphic novel department, not collected editions. And we both really enjoyed working with each other. I had kind of like laid some groundwork of wanting to do something with Jaime and Blue Beetle. And then when the program was over, she just kind of pulled me aside. I remember it was at the DC offices, which don't exist anymore. They moved them. And she was just like, "So what's your take on Blue Beetle? What would you do if you could do a Jaime graphic novel?" So it was always graphic novel from that point. But I think it's also because I had already shifted most of my work to graphic novels, from my first single issue series at Image to then doing graphic novels at HarperCollins and Penguin Random House. But that decision of like moving career-wise to that was because there's so much opportunity in the graphic novel space right now. These publishers are like paying real advances where people could actually like work and live off of it, to make original books, like creator-owned books that creators keep the rights to. So that to me was an opportunity that I wanted to take on. And I guess because of the work I was doing in graphic novels, then that's what caught my editor's eye at DC about doing Blue Beetle as a graphic novel.
Okay. Now I have to ask the very obvious question: how different is it to write from single issues to graphic novel? Or maybe even Home started as an idea as a graphic novel and you were like, oh, I have to make it in single issues, I have to tweak it a little bit. How is that different?
I liken it to the difference between TV and films, right? Where TV is like single issues, it's serialized storytelling. Back in the day, it was maybe like Monster of the Week, right? Where like every episode was a different bad guy. Now a lot of TV is like you have to end on a cliffhanger, right, to keep the story going, and that to me is like single issues. And then graphic novels is just like it's a full story. You don't have to force episode or issue breaks. You can just tell this whole 3-act structure story. So to me, when I have a new idea, I generally know from the beginning, is this going to be a single issue series? Is it going to be a graphic novel? Because I think it's just conducive to the story, which format is better for it. But there are times when ideas do start off as a single issue idea and then it turns out to be a graphic novel idea. So that does happen, but okay. I think usually the story dictates for me.
And can you tell us a little bit about the pitch? Like, how does that even work? If your editor approached you about writing a story about Jaime and wanted to make it into a graphic novel, do you still then have to pitch, or they just go with, you've got 3 ideas, choose one? How does that even work?
Yeah, I mean, so you pitch it. So I wrote like a 1-page document that's essentially, it's kind of like, it's almost exactly, if you read the back of the book, of the Blue Beetle book, that's almost my pitch to the letter, and when you pitch, you kind of just give like your high concept, like your 30,000 feet idea. You're not getting into like, and then the character does this and then it does that. It's more about mood and a little bit of story and a lot of character, so for this book, my pitch to DC was, to me, the relationship between the Scarab and Jaime is one of a form of radicalization. The Scarab is always trying to push, at least in the beginning of the Blue Beetle story, usually is always trying to push Jaime to like his base instincts, to be more violent, to be a herald for the Reach, and to do this alien race's bidding, right? So to me, I drew a parallel between that and what a lot of teenagers go through now with online radicalization and the way that algorithms are just built to push people into these black holes, into either side of the biggest extreme. So we introduced a character named Riley who does go down that black hole, and ends up with like very xenophobic and anti-immigrant views, despite growing up in El Paso, which is a border town, and being Jaime's ex-best friend. And then really it's about like, how does one character, Jaime, deal with the radicalization of the Scarab in a positive way, how does Riley deal with it in a negative way, and then how do you reconcile, and how do you like help a kid like Riley come back from that, so it's a very grounded take on Blue Beetle. It's an origin story, but it's also like a very action-packed story where the Reach is trying to invade Earth, while on the ground there's a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric, and the kind of like I think one of the last lines in the pitch was like, the real threat is actual aliens, not illegal aliens. So for me it was a way to like really weave in a lot of real world issues while still doing like a fun superhero story.
I think, some of the most remembered stories that I had was when I was a kid, not really being aware of these things, because, I was a kid reading comic books. So to me, it was about the super heroics of things. It was about the X-Men saving the day. It was about Spider-Man swinging right at the nick of time, or Superman stopping this huge war. The older you get, the more you realize, especially Marvel comics, just how big they were into social commentary when it was happening, right? Like they wanted to be in the forefront of, we have student riots, we have the women movement, we've got, like all these different things. And it seems like the editors and Stan Lee wanted to get the writers involved and the artists involved. So you don't really notice it a lot when you're a kid. You notice it a lot more when you're an adult because, you've lived life. I grew up in an era in the 80s and I came to Kentucky. So, I am an immigrant. We moved to Miami where there were a lot of people like us. I'm from Peru originally.
Yeah.
And then my family decided to move to Kentucky, which is where my aunt was living at the time. And there was nobody that looked like me at school. And I didn't speak English. That was the other thing because, when you're in Miami, there's a lot of like Cuban folks down there.
I'm from Miami, by the way.
Oh, are you really? Okay.
Yeah. And my family's Cuban and Colombian.
Oh my gosh, dude, Miami Beach, man. I spent so many summers down there visiting. I'd stay with my uncle for a couple of weeks, brother. And oh man, so many fun times when I was in my 20s too at South Beach. Anyway.
Wait, where do you live in Miami? Just to go off track for a second.
We only stayed there for about 2.5 months, honestly.
Oh, okay.
We moved there and then we moved immediately to Kentucky because I hadn't started school yet. That was the thing. My parents wanted me to start school, so I couldn't even tell you where we lived. It was a small apartment for a little while that my uncle had rented for us. But then it was decided that we moved to Kentucky, because they thought
big whiplash.
Well, they thought throwing me into a school system where everybody spoke Spanish was not going to help me. They needed to throw me into a school system where everybody spoke English. And you're forced to learn the language because you're still a kid. I was in the 3rd grade when this happened. And as you know, the younger you are, it's easier to learn languages. Because you're opening up that part of your brain that you don't really use that much when you're an adult, right? Like you're not conjugating the verbs or anything like that. You're still learning about verbs and adjectives at that age. So when we moved up here, it was impossible to make friends because we went to it was the Catholic school. I went to a private school where people had to pay tuition to go to school. And I didn't because they were taking us in as, immigrants and it's the church, right? So they want to help out. So I went to, and I got into a lot of fistfights because it was I didn't know the language and I could tell I was getting made fun of. My point of this whole story is, man, I lost myself in comics and it would have been so cool to read something like this at that age. Comics helped me read English. The reason why I was I'm gonna tackle this. The summer of 1987, I was going into the 4th grade, and it was one of those cases where the teachers and the principals were like, your son is getting grades, great grades in math and science, but it's the reading and writing that he's having issues with. So we're going to see how he does for the first couple months of the 4th grade, and we may have to hold him back. And I was like, hell no, I'm not being held back. But it was comics that, that summer of 1987, I will never forget, just playing outside and then coming to my room, and my uncle would get me comics.
Cool.
and we would go to this little comic book store too, in the flea market that had like 10-cent comics.
Mhm.
And I would force myself to read and read and read until I started, learning to properly read English. It was really cool. So I'm a big fan of like paying it forward and donating graphic novels to school, especially little kids. But yeah, it would have been so awesome to see something like this at that age.
What were you reading at the time?
X-Men.
Cool.
I still am.
Yeah.
I never stopped.
That checks out.
Come on, man. A group of people that nobody wants around. Yeah, come on.
That's an amazing story, though. That's how you learned how to read and speak English to an extent. Yeah, I mean, for me, like, I had a different experience because I grew up in Miami. Spanish was my first language. My parents spoke both English and Spanish, but only spoke Spanish in the house. And I learned English by like watching Sesame Street and when I went to kindergarten and pre-K. And for me, like, comics were an escape to an extent, but they were still ubiquitous at that time. Like, I would go to the drugstore or I would go to the gas station and I could just get really cheap, inexpensive comics. But I never had to worry about language, because even if I didn't speak English, like you said, everybody in Miami speaks Spanish.
Right.
But despite that, like, with the exception of Univision or Telemundo, I didn't see any people that looked like me in any media, right? Including comics. And, you do these weird things. Maybe you have this experience too, but where you see certain traits that remind you of like your own culture or people in your family, and you like attach yourself to them. Like, so for me, I grew up watching Dragon Ball. My uncle from Colombia would bring me tapes because they were ahead on Dragon Ball in Colombia. They got it before we did. And for some bizarre reason, I mean, not that like I can draw the connections now, but I identified with Vegeta, because he reminded me of a lot of my uncles, like short, stocky, angry,
all the
time. Yeah, like that's the Latino on Dragon Ball,
Wait, that's the Latino in Dragon Ball. He don't want nothing to do with his kid. He ain't got no responsibility.
Yeah, I didn't say it. Did he ever have a secret family? He might have. He might as well have. Really draw the parallels. but yeah, so like, making these comics, like, I love comics. I grew up on comics. But a part of it is like a responsibility to try to like honor the kid that I was, and to make comics that I would have wanted to read at that time, and that, would have made me feel more included or more part of like American society or whatever,
Okay. Yeah. I think that is something I always bring up on my channel, right? Like, I grew up in the 80s, so there weren't a lot of characters that looked like me. So I didn't like, so when people ask me like who my favorite characters are, it's always like, Wolverine or Storm or Uncle Scrooge. It's never characters that look like me because we didn't have that many characters. We were actually debating on Saturday, like, did Sunspot count as a Latino? He's Brazilian, but he speaks Portuguese. No, I don't think he counts. Living Lightning from the Avengers, probably, but then you're like digging that far deep. If you're digging
you gotta
Lightning, you're like,
you gotta really go deep.
we were already out of Latinos.
Yeah, you're scouring the DC Wikipedia Latino fandom section.
But I'll never forget
these random names.
I will never forget, like, so I'm one of these people. Yeah, I didn't have to have a character that looked like me to relate to the character.
Yeah.
However, when I went to go see Into the Spider-Verse, the very first movie, I was sitting there with my friends, and we were about to go and review the movie. And there was a little kid there. I think it was with his uncle, and he had to have been like 4 or 5. And it was the most adorable thing I've ever seen. He's like, wow, whatever he said, dad or uncle, like he said, man, he looks just like me. And it clicked, man.
Yeah.
I was like, I didn't need representation growing up, but I'm glad that kids have that option. Dude, one of my favorite interviews I've ever had, I was being interviewed by a group of kids that were in what grade were they in? They were in the 4th grade, 3rd and 4th grade. They interviewed me this summer. It was for their school thing. And it was so cool because it's like how to, like, what you do for a living. And it's like, the teacher's husband's one of my viewers and asked me last year to do it, and he asked me again this year. I'm like, of course. That was so awesome. This was an eye opening though. I was like, who here likes Batman? And kids are like, yeah, Batman. And I'm like, who likes Spider-Man? And they were like, which one?
Yeah.
Like, I've never been asked that question, right? Because Spider-Man. So when I said, Peter Parker, who likes the original Spider-Man? About 3 kids raised their hands, right? And I said, who likes Miles Morales? Dude, they lost their minds. And I said, Miles Morales, like he was a real celebrity. I'm like, whoa, that is a big difference.
Awesome.
That is a big difference.
Yeah. And listen, man, I grew up in comics. Like I love comics. I love the comics community, but that's the thing that people don't get, especially when it comes to like toxic fandoms. Like that's what people don't get. Like it does mean something to people. And as we shift into different generations, different characters that really relate to them are the ones that connect, That's amazing that they said that. Which Spider-Man?
I had to share that with my wife, and I shared it with my contact at Marvel. I'm like, I've never been asked which Spider-Man is your favorite. That's freaking awesome, man. I think no matter what generation you come from, though, like your generation of growing up with comics is going to be the best generation. So whenever there's changes, you have the older generation that always likes to step in and going, yeah, well, back in my day, they didn't do it, like they didn't need to do that. It doesn't matter, right? It's a shift and change, and people hate that. Yeah, and I don't want to say everybody. Some people are okay with it. I have a really good friend that has his own show, Omni Dog. I know you know who he is. That guy just loves reading comics, like to this day. He's been reading for 50 plus years, and still loves the new stuff. So it's not everybody, but there's usually like an old guard that's like, nah.
Yeah, I think that's with everything. You see it with film culture. Also, you see it everywhere. I think it's a natural progression.
We fear change, guard from Wade's World. Okay, so not only did you write that, and that is coming out today, but you're also writing another book that reminds me of something that I just said that comes out. Or no, you wrote it. It's coming out in March, right?
In March, yeah. So it's a middle grade graphic novel published by Penguin Random House. It's called Speak Up Santiago. And this is, this book exists more in the world of like Raina Telgemeier, Kayla Miller, these like, I think a lot of people forget that like the most popular comics in the US are like Raina Telgemeier comics, Dogman comics, this like middle grade boom market of comics. So this book exists in that space more. It's a totally grounded comic, unlike any of my other books where, there's some sort of supernatural or superhero element to it. But it's about a boy named Santiago, lives in New York, has a Colombian dad, American mom, and struggles to speak Spanish. And it's something that he feels a lot of shame about, that, gives him a lot of anxiety. And it was inspired a lot by experiences that I've had, and also my son, where, like I said before, I grew up speaking Spanish. It was my first language. But as I've gotten older and English has become my dominant language, it is something that still gives me anxiety today, when I have to speak Spanish in public, especially. And, essentially it's a graphic novel about how he learns to deal with that, joining a soccer team with a bunch of other kids that he meets, and how like this community helps lift him up and reminds him that, the love that his family has for him is not based on how well he speaks Spanish. It's about, what he cares about, and his love for his family and his culture. So yeah, that one comes out in March. It's the first book in a graphic novel series called the Hillside Valley series. It's a series where every book takes place in this like small Hudson Valley, New York town. And every book is based on a different character from this group of friends. So yeah, that comes out in March, and it's my first middle grade graphic novel. So I'm excited about that.
What is the age for Home, for example, the one that was
Home? I tend to say Home is 12 and up. I know people have given it to their kids that are younger than that. And I obviously wrote it for the adult, Image Comics market. as single issues, but it's used in a lot of classrooms. Like the trade has an educator guide. So I like to think that it, like middle school and up, it,
Dude,
it runs the gamut.
that's awesome. And I just realized that having you on at this time is during the National Hispanic Heritage Month.
Yeah.
And I totally, we could, ¿por qué no estamos haciendo esto en español?
Lo podemos hacer en español. Veo un comentario ahí que me están preguntando para hacer el chat en español.
No, algunas personas hablan español. Tenemos muchos latinos aquí. There are some questions in the chat that I wanted to address.
Sure.
There's samples pages of the artwork available online for the Blue Beetle book.
Yeah.
Who's the artist on that? By the way?
Yeah, I should have talked about that from the beginning because the artist is one of my best friends, Jacoby Salcedo.
Okay.
He was the artist also of our previous book, Frontera, this one which came out last year.
Actually, if you can open it up and show a little bit of the artwork, that might help.
So here's some of the artwork. Frontera is a book about a boy named Mateo. He grew up in the U.S., had no idea that he was undocumented, was deported from one day to another, and now he's on his journey back home to Arizona. He's crossing the Sonoran Desert from Mexico to the U.S., and along the way, he meets Guillermo, who's a ghost of a migrant that died in that same desert 100 years ago, who now takes him on this journey. It's very like an episodic kind of adventure story, but that takes place in the Sonoran Desert. So that was Jacoby and I's first book together. And then we did Blue Beetle, which comes out today. And here's a few pages from it you guys wanted to see. Jacoby is, like I said, he's one of my best friends. We got our start working on mini comics together that we just post online for free. And then we just started doing graphic novels, and he's just an amazing artist. I love his work. Can see some Blue Beetle action back here. I love this panel. That's actually going to be my new banner for conventions, that image. But yeah, so it came out today. You can get it anywhere you buy books, but it should be in comic shops tomorrow too.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Let's see. Does the graphic novel allow you to provide a defined story without worries of it being cut short before it gets really going? That is a good question, like the difference between a graphic novel and a monthly single issue book.
Yeah, I mean that's what I love about graphic novels. I get to tell my full story. A little quick aside about Home, because it is creator owned, but it was single issues. It wasn't at Image originally. It was at a different publisher that I won't name. And we produced 2 issues with that publisher. And then it was canceled before it was even announced, before the first issue even came out. So it's and some people might be able to guess the publisher because they've done this very publicly multiple times to other books. But even with, I feel like that question probably comes from like a big 2 perspective, because that happens all the time. But I'm just saying this to state the point that like it also happens in creator owned stuff. And that's what I love about graphic novels. Like, you get contracted to make a full book and you get to tell the whole story, no matter what happens, whether it sells 2 copies or 1 million copies, you still got to tell the whole story.
So it was creator owned, and you guys were able to publish it through somebody before Image Comics, and then Image came around and did the single issues and did the trade paperback.
Yeah, so we'd signed, we'd gotten the book greenlit at a different creator-owned publisher, and then before the first issue even came out, they canceled it. So we took those 2 issues that we'd already made to Image. Image said, "Yeah, let's do it," and we made
because it's creator-owned, right? It did not belong to the company. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that is the beauty of creator-owned. You can shop it around wherever you want to at any time.
Oh yeah, we see. We see all sorts of books that jump around 1 million publishers, Usagi Yojimbo. How many publishers has that had? You know, like
But a lot, including Mirage. I don't think Image has ever. I don't think Image has ever published
yeah.
Usagi. I know they did like Strangers in Paradise,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't
Because they're
think.
a dark horse now, right?
And they did, and I think they did do some Ninja Turtles. I forgot about that.
Oh yeah, yeah, they did. They did.
But I don't think Usagi has been over there at Image, but a lot of other different publishers for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the good thing about single issue or creator owned, and then also graphic novels. You know, you get to tell your full story, and you know we have ideas for more Blue Beetle that we're talking to DC about. So hopefully we get to do more. But if we don't, we told our full story that we intended to tell. You know, everything else is just bonus.
Do you have any plans or something that you would like to keep writing at DC, like a monthly comic?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of things that I would love to do at DC, especially at DC, because you know, what I love about DC is I feel like it's a lot more grounded these days, at least. You know, you talked about how Marvel uh, did a lot of social issues when you were younger, right? But I
Well,
feel
yeah, I
like,
mean, yeah, 60s and especially the 70s. My goodness. Yeah,
yeah,
lots of
yeah,
Captain America was written like that. I mean, Black Panther, obviously,
hmm
because of that movement. That, oh my gosh, yeah,
yeah. There's a
just
lot.
about every freaking monthly comic, Marvel was
Mhm.
like putting in something that was going on outside in
Yeah,
the real world, whether it was the Vietnam War or
hmm
all these other movements. Yeah,
yeah. And you know what? Today, I'm not saying that DC is like that right now, but I feel like you can do much more grounded to real life comics with DC characters these days. So yeah, there's a lot that I'd like to do at DC. You know, there's more coming from me at DC that I can't talk about yet. But yeah, you know, I have a lot of ideas for things I'd love to do at DC.
awesome. Okay, so then I gotta ask. Let's do Marvel and DC. You could write one
Mhm.
character. Actually, before we do, I have to highlight this comment because I think it's a beautiful comment. As a father, thanks for writing with a sense of purpose as you entertain. Glad my son gets to grow up enjoying comics with talented, thoughtful, and
Oh,
conscientious people, writers,
thank you,
people,
Matt.
sorry, as yourself, man. What a
Thank you.
compliment.
I
Uh,
appreciate that. Thank you, Matt.
and Bar, is good to see you here. Glad you're okay and safe, buddy. Uh, if you could write for Marvel and DC, what character would it be?
All right.
Do
So
Marvel.
I do a really bad job at like making good business decisions, you know? Because I think the obvious answer, if I'm, you know, I'm a writer early in my career, right? The obvious answer is Batman, right? It's the biggest book in comics, the biggest single issue book. Um, but you know, one of my favorite series of the last I don't know, 20-ish years was Gotham Central. I love that book. I love how it's, you know, it focuses on, you know, these people that exist in a world where there is superheroes and supervillains. But this, you know, the main protagonists are these cops, right? That are in this world. Um, you know, what I, if right now, you know, Marie Javins, the editor in chief at DC, was
Mhm.
like, Julio, you get to do any book you want. What I'd love to do is a book about the Gotham Gazette, the, you know, the newspaper in Gotham, and just write a story about the journalists of Gotham that report on these crazy stories and what's happening, and just have a book about the real people in Gotham in the midst of Batman fighting villains, in the midst of everything, you know. So that's my 100% honest answer. My other answer is Captain America. I'd love to write Captain America. I think I could do a lot with Captain America.
Now I'm gonna ask you, man. Same thing those kids ask me. Which Spider-Man? Which Captain America?
Which Captain America? Steve Rogers, you know,
Steve
because I
Rogers.
think, yeah, I think so. Or create my own Captain America. But uh, that's territory that I get a little scared of wading into with fan reactions and stuff. But yeah, I think I could do a lot with Captain America.
So Captain America. That's a good answer. That would be so hard to write. I find that character to be,
Mhm.
eh, you know, people's expectations are so much. No matter who the writer is,
I think it's the same issue as Superman, where like you get the really hokey, version, and then you get the evil version. Like those are the two that people tend to, jump between.
Yo,
Um,
man, if they bring back Gotham Central, though, I would be so happy. I love that
I
series.
know, me too, me too. And I love Renee Montoya. She's one of my favorite characters. The first thing I ever wrote for DC was a Renee Montoya short story, like a 10-pager, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, I love Gotham
Where
Central.
did that show up?
It was in Batman Urban Legends. I forget what issue it was, but that was the anthology series, the Gotham anthology series that was coming out like 2 years ago. Now it's Brave and the Bold, I think. But I think it was like issue 21, maybe. But it was a 10-pager on Renee.
Okay.
Yeah.
Man.
I'm glad Logan likes my Gotham Gazette idea. I'll send a screenshot of this to my editors at DC.
That's right.
We got one customer.
That's how it starts. That is
Yeah.
the voice of many, representing many. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So what else is in the future for you? You've got a couple projects coming out. You mentioned that some things you couldn't say yet at DC, right?
Yeah, DC. I have a few other graphic novels that I've already written that are being drawn now. All three. So my next three books are at First Second, the graphic novel publisher. One of them is a middle grade book with Jacoby, who did Blue Beetle. The other one is a YA book, also with Jacoby, called Prison Kids, which is inspired by me growing up in. My dad used to be a corrections officer at a prison, and we lived in a trailer park that was right next door to it because it was like a form of subsidized housing for prison employees. That book is really just inspired by growing up in this strange place where,
Miami?
In Miami, yeah. This is in the Everglades. Like it's far west, and you're literally in the Everglades. There's a prison there called the South Florida Reception Center. And you have people locked up for all sorts of reasons, but what in hindsight now as an adult, what I really reflect on is like, there's people locked up for like, this is the 90s, like marijuana and like really petty offenses. And then you have a bunch of like, I'm not painting with a broad brush, just like specific people that you would see who are also engaging while living in that trailer park in illegal behavior, living next door to the prison, and it's just this very strange place that I thought was a really unique experience and lends itself to telling a story of like these teenagers growing up in a trailer park next door to a prison, so that's coming out through First Second also. And then I have one more book that hasn't been announced, also at First Second. That's a nonfiction book that I'm co-writing with the founder of this revolutionary Puerto Rican group that the book is about. And that's been a really cool experience because I'm co-writing a book with someone that I really look up to and admire. But yeah, so a lot of graphic novel work, but then also just like I'm working on new creator-owned stuff that should start coming out next year. That hasn't been announced yet. So there's always a bunch of different projects.
And when you're not writing, what are you doing? What do you read? Do you still read?
I read a lot. I read a lot. Unfortunately, I don't read. When I say I read a lot, it's mostly not comics.
Oh my gosh, Julio, are you even on the right channel? What are you reading, man?
I mean, look, I'll tell you what I'm reading in comics right now.
Okay.
I'm reading Acting Class by Nick Pisano.
Wow,
So
look
I don't
at
know if
you.
you're familiar with this, but very surreal and weird book. It was published by Drawn and Quarterly. I don't know. The only thing I can compare it to is like if anybody saw that show, The Rehearsal, the Nathan Fielder show on HBO. It's just super surreal, very much in that wave. Comics. I've also have been reading. I read this recently, the Kent State graphic novel.
Oh, that's on my list.
Very good. It's by Durf. I also, I'm a big Universal Monsters fan. So I read James's Dracula
Hmm.
recently, which I thought was really good. I also, my good friend Chris Condon and Jake Phillips, their book, The Enfield Gang Massacre, it was at Image. Um, but yeah, I read a lot of nonfiction books. I feel like a lot of it feeds my writing,
Yeah, of course.
so, like it's not all comics, but like, I just read this book, Lost City of Z, which is inspiring a book that I'm working on now. Because so much of it just like almost all my comics come from, real world inspiration. So that's kind of like my way of feeding that, reading a lot of nonfiction, watching a lot of documentaries. But yeah, I'm lucky that the work that I do is all fueled by my interests and what I'm passionate about. So if I'm going into like 2 a.m. Wikipedia black holes, it usually makes its way into the comics somehow.
So it's good that you're reading books then.
Books.
It inspires you to write comics.
Yeah.
That's great. Do you find yourself when you're writing stories to like be listening to music or putting TV on, or you have to be like one of these writers that's I am going to have complete silence?
Yeah. No, for me, I tend to I think like a lot of people today, I tend to get very distracted by like, I'm writing on my computer, I have notifications going off, I have my phone right next to me. So I've started using this method called the Pomodoro method, which is essentially like this idea of like you work for 30 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break, and you work for 30 minutes, take a 5-minute break. So I use these, like I go on YouTube and there's these like videos that are like 16 hours long that just play like very chill music,
Okay.
and they have the timer built in. And, so I'm just listening to like very ambient kind of chill music. And then at some point, the alarm goes off and I take a 5-minute break. And then the alarm goes off and I get back to work. So I listen to a lot of like music without lyrics when I'm writing, just like very chill stuff, or like hip hop, like without lyrics, like I don't know if you listen to it, but like people like Jay Dilla and Madlib, that are they're just beats, so I can focus on the words that I'm writing. Because I do, like if I'm listening to music with lyrics, I start typing the lyrics at a certain point.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as long as it's like, what is it? My wife listens to lo-fi.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
chill lo-fi beats.
Jill Love, I do. She loves that stuff. She's
Yeah.
a teacher, so she's grading, or as I'm,
Oh yeah.
and I like to go into her room. She has a little craft room to read books, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes it's funny because the lo-fi, the chill lo-fi music doesn't quite match the badass scenes that are happening in the books that I'm reading.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is so weird.
Yeah.
But
Is it a little too chill sometimes?
a little
Puts you
too
to sleep?
chill for me, man. Sometimes I need some like Guns and Roses or something back there.
Yeah.
Julio, a great professional, a great writer. Happy with your work. Congratulations on everything.
Thank you. Oren is an inker, an amazing inker.
Oh, that's
We
great.
worked on a book at Marvel together. But yeah, thank you.
What was the book on Marvel that you guys worked together?
So that was it was a short story for I guess it was like 3 years ago now, because it was they do Marvel Voices. It was like a Hispanic Heritage Month um like anthology. So we did a story in
Oh,
that.
wait a minute! I remember that. Yeah, it was.
Comunidades, I think it was called.
Yeah, I was like, if of all the times they could have called something Latin X, I think that's not how you pronounce it. Like, this is the time to do it and throw a bunch of X-Men characters in there. Yeah, I
The
remember
Latin X-Men.
that. Latinx. Why didn't we do that? Come on, man.
Yeah, so that was my first well, you know what? My only project at Marvel. DC
So
is the one
far,
that gives me a
so
lot of
far.
love. So far, yeah,
So far, that's right. That's
but yeah,
right.
that was a lot of fun to work with him. But yeah, and that was really early in my career too. When I was just breaking in, I realized we didn't really. I don't know if you have like a lot of like aspiring comic creators in your that watch your channel and stuff. But
sometimes people do reach out and
Cool.
ask, and yeah, so some.
Yeah, because the way that I broke in was by I kind of mentioned before making mini comics with Jacoby,
Hmm.
but I started making like 4 to 10 page like short comics that I'd hire an artist, and then we just put it up on social media, and it was sort of my way of like building a portfolio, which was all in service of trying to pitch Home because I had the idea for Home. Like the idea for Home is what made me want to become a comic book writer because I had the idea and I was like, oh, this would be a great comic. Now I have to learn how to write comics to make it happen. Um, and then I read, I'm sure Ed Brisson.
Hmm.
He had posted really good advice on Twitter, which was like everybody starts in comics because they want to make like a big project, a 50-page series or 50-issue series, or like a big 300-page graphic novel. But the best thing is just to start off small and make short stories. So I came into comics because I wanted to write Home, but I kind of put a pause on that and decided, let me just make short comics. And I made like 5 mini comics that then opened the door to work on Home at Image. And that really is what started everything.
Wow, that was some really solid advice because okay,
Yeah.
when as kids, when you're growing up, there was no thing like the internet. There was no DeviantArt. There
Mhm.
wasn't anything like that. You would be lucky if a show came around you, if you had to drive an hour or maybe 6 hours to go to a big show, and they were doing portfolio reviews. Because I remember I was in my teens, yeah, that was something I wanted to be. I wanted to work in
Yeah.
comics, and I dabbled a little bit in art, so I would show my sequential art to a couple of editors. I can't remember, it wasn't anything like Marvel or DC, and Image
Mm.
wasn't around at the time, so it had to have been some smaller editors from smaller publishers. I'm sorry, but they would give you some great advice, critical advice that you needed to hear.
Mhm.
And I never thought about, wait, what if I was a writer trying to break it into comics? How would
It's
you even
tough.
do that back then, right?
Yeah.
Like
No one
now,
wants to read a script.
yeah, it's like show me some sequential art. Let me see if you can do that. But how do you show a script? How do you show an idea? Like that I find really difficult. Even
Yeah.
even to this day.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm friends with a lot of writers, right? And we share our work with each other. Like, there are some times when a friend of mine sends me a script, and like, I don't want to read the script, you got to read all the descriptions, and then
Send
you
me the
forget
pitch.
yeah, um, but yeah, it's so that advice from Ed was really helpful because I was able to show editors my work by just showing them a comic that I had produced, that I had made with an artist. And then, I took that and the pitch for Home to New York Comic Con in 2019 and started cold going up to tables, editors that I didn't know. I was kind of just like, I was going based off of like the inside of an issue, right? Like, oh, it says edited by this person. Let me put their name in Google Images, see what they look like, and then like going up to a table with my phone and being like, oh yeah, that's the guy. And just pitch them my book, which I don't recommend. It was humiliating, and it wasn't well received most of the time.
Really?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think especially with a book like Home that is, it was about the family. It took place during the family separation crisis. This kid has superpowers. It's not an easy sell. So it is ironic to think back at like, all of the like lower tier creator owned publishers that like scoffed at me and like told me this too political, like we can never publish it. And then through luck, I was introduced to someone at Image, who then put it in front of Eric Stevenson, the publisher.
Yeah.
And then he said yes, so like the biggest creator owned publisher said yes when like all these smaller ones told me it wasn't a good idea. So
Perseverance, man. Perseverance.
yeah,
Goes a long way.
and also like a little bit of luck, right? Like I pitched one of the
That
editors I pitched it to was from Top Cow. This woman, Elena Salcedo, and she loved the pitch, but she's right. It didn't make sense for Top Cow. And the books that they were publishing. But she's the one who was like, but you know what? I bet Image Central would be really interested in this. And she put it in front of Eric. And then that ended up leading to it being published by Image. So, you know, I had to go through the humiliating process of going up to all these other booths. But it did land me at Image, which, you know, I'm like, I can't even express how grateful I am to them for that. Cause that's what, you know, got me into being published as a creator.
2019. And when was it that Image said, let's do it?
They said, so this was also like the scary part is that I remember because I was at work, I used to work for Apple at the time. And it was February 2020. They say yes. I'm ecstatic. 2 days later, our offices are closed for COVID.
Yeah.
And the comic industry shuts down, right? Diamond shuts down.
Pencils down. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Time.
And I'm this person who like, I had been, you know, like Image Comics, you know, like the biggest creator-owned publisher just said yes to me. And now like the whole industry might not survive this, you know? So then the book ended up not coming out until April 2021. So they started publishing again, I think in like November of 2020, maybe. But by then, you know, the policy at Image is that you need to have 3 issues completed before you're solicited.
Okay.
So essentially you get like a 6-month head start. You know, if like you're making an issue a month, 3 months of making the first 3 issues, and then 3 months until the first issue comes out after it's solicited. But then there was this whole backup of other books that, you know, were going to launch before our book, but didn't because of the pandemic and the shutdown. So then our book got pushed back until April. So yeah, it ended up coming out April 2021, but it was right before COVID that they greenlit it. So over a year before that.
That was a really weird time, man.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
because there was so much uncertainty going on, and people didn't know. Publishers were making decisions, and then those decisions snowballed into other decisions, and
and we still had the Diamond monopoly at the time. So, you know, one distributor closes and the industry's done, you know?
Yeah, people didn't know what they were going to do. And I mean, that led into other possibilities and outlets. And yeah, it was a crazy time. And I'm glad that you finally got it to come out. You not only got the single issues, but you got a trade paperback. And now you're working on other projects for different publishers. That's wonderful, dude. That's great.
Thank you, man.
It's about not giving up and just keep one door closes. I mean, being turned down from smaller publishers for sure it's like, I know my mentality is like, well, if they said no, like, what are the damn odds that somebody like Image or Dark Horse or IDW says yes? You know what I'm saying? Like, if the small publisher said no, then it must not be good. You could have gone that route.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely that definitely went through my head, you know. I think that's a very like basic and natural response to it, you know. But I think what I've realized now is that, especially I think the smaller a publisher is, the less risk that they're willing to take, and I think that's just true of any small business, right? So they are looking for the sure hits. And if a book like mine, like Home, is something that to them seems like it is like it's a risk, they're not going to do it, you know. But to Image, a book like mine is not that big of a risk to them, you know. If it barely sold any copies, that wouldn't be a huge hit to them, right? But luckily, because it is Image, and any book with an Image logo kind of has a floor for how few copies it could sell, because there's enough people that buy every Image #1 that any book with that logo is going to do at least a bare minimum of really good business. You know, that helped our book do, you know, fairly well and be like a middle tier success, you know. So yeah, it was definitely discouraging, but I would tell, like I've told to a lot of aspiring creators, like, that's not, you know, these editors are individual people with individual tastes, you know. And just like I have taste and you have taste, and they might be opposed to each other, it doesn't mean that somebody else isn't going to like it. Some other editor, gatekeeper, decision maker.
Brother, that is a great way of looking at things. Seriously. And I think a lot of writers or people trying to make it into comics would benefit from hearing things like that, because it is really draining to the soul to get rejection.
Yeah.
And no matter how many people you see and how many of these big people, and not just in the comic industry, but in like movies and TV shows, or just writers, or people sports people in sports, like, that have been rejected. No matter how many times you hear stories of like, yeah, I was rejected so many times, I was rejected 30 times before they said yes. Or Stephen King's book on writing, for example.
Yeah.
No matter how many times you hear it, it's still about your own experience and being rejected. Some people can take it, some people are ready for it, and others are like, I don't think I can do this.
Yeah. And you know what? Like, it still happens to me. It still happens to a lot of writers that are, bigger than I am. Like, being a writer is dealing with rejection all the time. Even if a publisher, if DC or Marvel asks you to pitch something, like, you're getting rejected a lot of the times, and even worse, sometimes you're in like a bake-off situation with another writer, where they've asked multiple people, what's your take on this character? And they're just choosing the best one, whatever they think is the best one. But you got to learn to take it, and have a thick skin. But I think when you're starting off, especially, where it also feels like you're just throwing pitches at a slush pile that isn't even going to be read, to me, that's the worst, because it's like you're not even getting a shot. But that's also what
you're not getting any kind of feedback, which is something like
exactly.
you want at the time, right?
Yeah. But that's also what networking is for, like, if tomorrow I want to do a book at whatever creator-owned publisher, I'm not, I've built a relationship with somebody there already that I can then hit them up, and ask them if they're interested in the idea or what they think, and it's not just throwing, into like an invisible inbox that never gets opened, so that's, unfortunately, that's part of the game also, networking and meeting people so that you do have an inroad into these publishers.
Yeah. Here's a couple of questions, and then I wanted to ask you for one thing. Does Julio have any Black Label book pitches brewing in his mind? Yeah.
Easy. Bane. I'd love to do a Bane book.
In Spanish? I just remember painted Murciélago. Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah.
When?
Definitely got.
Like, when in the timeline of Bane? Before Nightfall or present day?
I actually, and because the question is Black Label, I actually would love to do like an old man Bane story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But I have a specific idea that could really just, it could take place anytime in his story.
So you have put some thought.
Oh yeah.
That's awesome.
That's why I had it loaded.
Tommy Farley can give a lesson or two about rejection. Even when he was consolidated comic book artist. Yeah, man. I think a lot of these folks have experienced rejection time and time again, and I think it's the people that persevered. And not only that, but it's like, once you make it into the game, not everybody can do this for a living. Not everybody can keep writing stories, not ideas. Sometimes ideas just kind of fade out, unfortunately, and also artists. You got to be able to keep up sequential art.
Yeah,
you got to be able to pump that stuff out. So
yeah,
Julio, last thing I'm going to ask you before we end today is,
sure,
what advice would you give somebody that is trying to make it into comics? What would you say? What have you learned that you can give those words of wisdom?
I would say, first, don't chase trends. I see a lot of people who, they see the success that some other comic creator has. Let's just say, for example, because this is something that I've seen, and it's a hyper successful comic, right? You see something like Radiant Black, right? Which is like this combination of like superhero and like Power Rangers style stories. And then you start seeing other people who try to mimic that and like chase that trend because they saw that, you know, Radiant Black was a popular comic, right? Or Something is Killing the Children is a popular comic. But the truth is that Radiant Black isn't popular because of the exact pieces that are that make up the story. It's popular because this writer put himself into this book and took all the experiences that he's had and wrote this book that then resonates with other people, right? And it has the genre elements that people like also, but at the end of the day, like you can't mimic something and expect it to be popular. Like we already had Radiant Black, and it's going to continue to be like this huge successful book. You know, you have to do your own thing. So like that's one thing I would say, not to chase trends. The other thing too is like build a community with other people at your level, and other, like if you're like other writers or artists that are at your level and are coming up. You know, I forgot who told me this, but I thought it was great advice, because I think for me, like the most meaningful relationships that I've built in comics are not with like people who are 3 steps ahead of me that I want to be friends with or that I want my career to emulate. It's with the people that are coming up right next to me, who are going through the same things that I'm going through, who are dealing with, the same editors who maybe gave them a note that they didn't like, and you get to like really connect with people that are at your level. But really also just make comics, like it sounds super simple, to the point that it almost feels like patronizing to say it. But if you want to make comics, you have to make comics. If you want to be a writer, you have to write. And I think for a writer, it's a little tougher because, especially if you're a writer like me who can't draw at all, that means taking money out of your pocket and paying an artist to draw your scripts. So it takes a certain amount of like privilege or work and grind to like earn that extra money that you need.
Mhm.
And then also a certain amount of confidence that you feel confident enough that you're going to pay someone hundreds of dollars to draw your words, right? But if you really want to break into comics, like you have to make comics, like you have to be able to show people what you can do. And in this industry, in this medium, you can't just show someone a typed piece of paper when you're starting out. Like
Right.
when I was approached about Blue Beetle by DC, yeah, that was a typed piece of paper, but it was all predicated on what they knew that I'd done already. So until you get to that level, like you have to make comics, put them out there, and then use that and try to, turn that into something else, reach out to editors, reach out to these gatekeepers and show them your work, and it might not be something where you email Boom tomorrow and they say, yes, great, let's do a book with you right away, but if you do that enough times, you become someone that they know can produce good work and that they can trust with contracting to do a book, right? So I think that would be my biggest piece of advice. You just got to make comics.
I think that's some great advice, man. So again, the book Blue Beetle, or A Blue Beetle Story, is coming out today and will be available at your local comic book store tomorrow, Wednesday. Here, I'm going to let you hold up. This land is our land, Blue Beetle Story. And I just want to thank you, Julio, for taking the time to talk to us and giving some great advice. And I look forward to seeing your name on more and more projects, brother.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I look forward to seeing that old man, or El Viejo Bane, I guess.
Yeah, let's see if we can make that happen.
Yeah. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and smash that like button on the way out, and go and check out Julio's work. And he's also done Home and got that book in. Can you hold it up again? The book that you have coming out in March.
Oh, yeah.
And
this one's out in March. It's available for pre-order now. I know it's a long time from now, but if you go to any online, Amazon, whatever, or your local comic shop, they can pre-order it for you now.
All right. That's it, everybody. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.